At 65, Evelyn Porter lived a life that moved as quietly as the tide outside her small home in Port Angeles. The house had been hers for more than 30 years, a weathered, cedar-sided place perched near the shoreline, where gulls cried in the morning and the wind brushed through the tall grass as if it knew her by name. Inside, everything bore the weight of a life survived rather than lived. On the mantel sat a framed photograph of her late husband, Matthew Porter, his stern eyes fixed in the same unforgiving stare she remembered from their marriage. Even years after his passing, that photograph could still make her pause in the doorway, her breath hitching the way it used to when she listened for his heavy footsteps. The house carried memories, some warm, many not. It held the years she endured under his unpredictable temper, the words that cut deeper than any bruise, and the bruise-blue shadows she once tried to hide beneath layers of drugstore foundation before walking into her classroom. Evelyn never spoke of those moments. She tucked them into the quiet corners of her mind the same way she tucked away old report cards and lesson plans. She had survived them by becoming smaller, softer, and endlessly patient. When Matthew fell ill, pancreatic cancer, the kind that carried no hope, Evelyn cared for him out of duty, not love. The nurses spoke about compassion and devotion, but Evelyn felt something different. A suffocating dread, yes, and beneath it, a whisper of something she didn't dare acknowledge until the day he died. Relief, a sense that a weight had finally slipped from her shoulders, lightening them in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. She never said that out loud. She simply continued moving, the way she always had. Her world became her son, Eric. He had been sharp, ambitious, intense since childhood. When he furrowed his brow or raised his voice, a familiar shiver ran through Evelyn, an echo of the fear she had lived with for decades. Still, she believed she could shape him into something gentler. She poured everything she had into him once she became a widow, teaching by day, grading piles of essays by night, taking on translation jobs and tutoring to afford his textbooks, his rent, his meal plans. She wore herself thin, sipping weak tea at midnight with red-rimmed eyes, while Eric slept peacefully in his dorm miles away. Her sacrifices paid off. Eric graduated near the top of his class, landed a job in Seattle, climbed quickly into a regional management role, and married a sweet, soft-spoken young woman named Clara. Evelyn had always felt a tenderness toward Clara's gentle nature. The girl reminded her of the version of herself she once wished she could have been, open, unguarded, unafraid. As the years passed, Evelyn remained in her Port Angeles home, tending her small vegetable garden, sharing apples with neighbors, and enjoying evenings when the sun dipped low over the strait. She imagined this would be her life from now on. Slow mornings with warm oatmeal, conversations with the women who lived down the road, quiet afternoons reading novels in the patch of sunlight beside her window. Peace, genuine peace, finally seemed like something within her grasp. But peace, she had learned long ago, was fragile. One cool August afternoon, while she knelt among her tomato plants, her phone rang. She wiped her hands on her apron, expecting a neighbor or an old colleague. Instead, Eric's name lit up the screen. His voice, even in something as simple as "Mom, what are you doing?" carried an undercurrent she knew too well. Firm, expectant, leaving little room for conversation. She told him she was in the garden, checking the ripening fruit. He didn't comment on that. Instead, in the same decisive tone his father used to employ, he said, "You need to move to Seattle. It's not safe for you to live alone anymore. Clara and I have a room ready. I'll pick you up this weekend." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a discussion. And the moment the call ended, the air around Evelyn seemed to shift the way it does before a storm rolls in from the ocean. On Saturday morning, the sound of tires crunching over gravel pulled Evelyn away from her teacup when she stepped onto the porch. Eric was already out of the driver's seat of a sleek black Audi, a car so polished it reflected the gray sky like a mirror. He glanced at his watch before looking at her, impatience tightening the corners of his mouth. Clara stepped out from the passenger's side a moment later, offering a soft, almost apologetic smile as she hurried to help with Evelyn's bags. Clara moved gently, always a little too quickly, as if afraid she wasn't doing enough. She asked whether Evelyn had eaten, whether she'd slept well, whether she needed a scarf for the ride. Her kindness felt genuine, yet laced with something Evelyn couldn't quite place, an undercurrent of nervous energy that didn't belong to someone simply trying to be helpful. The drive to Seattle unfolded beneath a low, silver sky. Mountains loomed in the distance. Rain tapped intermittently against the windshield. As they crossed the Hood Canal Bridge and the city skyline emerged, glass towers rising like icy spires, Evelyn felt a shift deep in her chest. Port Angeles had the softness of salt air and old wooden fences. Seattle, by contrast, seemed sharpened, metal and concrete, and unblinking windows. Eric talked mostly about traffic, work, and efficiency, how living with them would simplify everything. Clara chimed in here and there with quiet reassurances, though each time she spoke, her eyes flicked toward Eric first, as if checking whether her words were acceptable. The high-rise in South Lake Union rose above the water like a monument. Its lobby was all marble floors and steel beams, clean lines and chilled air that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Evelyn followed them through automatic doors, past residents who moved briskly, earbuds in, eyes forward. The apartment itself was undeniably beautiful, a wide expanse of glass overlooking Lake Union, polished floors, a minimalist living room that looked lifted from a magazine spread. Clara guided Evelyn to a bedroom near the end of the hallway. The bed was neatly made, a soft gray comforter tucked in with precise corners. A lamp with a frosted shade sat on the nightstand. The closet was already arranged with space for her clothes. Everything was perfect, too perfect, like a hotel room prepared for a guest who wasn't expected to stay long. "I hope it's comfortable for you," Clara said, smoothing her hands along the comforter as if erasing invisible wrinkles. "It's lovely," Evelyn answered, though something inside her hesitated. Eric appeared in the doorway. "Clara, did you set up the pill organizer for her?" he asked, not unkindly, but with a clipped efficiency that suggested a checklist rather than concern. Clara nodded quickly. "Yes, everything's ready." "Good. We need to keep her on schedule." It was framed as care, but the tone held the firmness of command. Clara's shoulders tightened, barely noticeable unless one was watching closely. That evening, Clara cooked salmon with lemon and herbs, plating everything beautifully. She moved around the kitchen with practiced quietness, flinching whenever Eric reached past her for spices or utensils. During dinner, she laughed too quickly at his jokes and offered refills before anyone asked. Evelyn observed it all, the rapid nods. The way Clara's smile faltered the moment she looked away from Eric, the restless tapping of Clara's thumb against her fork. Something felt off, but Evelyn, unfamiliar with life in a bustling city and unwilling to jump to conclusions, told herself this must be the pace of urban living. People hurried. People were stressed. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. When night fell, she retreated to her new room. The apartment settled into an uncanny silence, no distant chatter from neighbors, no creak of settling wood, no hum of late-night television, only the faint, mechanical sigh of the building itself. Evelyn lay awake in the stillness, listening to a quiet so absolute it felt unnatural, and wondered whether this new life would ever feel like home. In the days that followed, Clara did everything she could to make Evelyn feel welcome. She took her to the Sunday farmers market near Lake Union, weaving through stands of homemade jams and fresh flowers with an enthusiasm that felt almost childlike. Clara bought her a soft, cream-colored cardigan, insisting the coastal winds in Port Angeles were different from Seattle's sharp chill. Evelyn tried to protest, but Clara shook her head with a gentle smile, pressing the folded sweater into her arms as if gifting warmth itself. Their outings became small rituals, Clara pointing out her favorite bakery, introducing Evelyn to a local barista, chatting about herbs and recipes while carrying bags of produce. For brief moments, it almost felt like the beginning of a new chapter, a lighter one, but every time they returned to the apartment, a shift occurred. Eric would greet them with the same polished smile he wore at work, but his eyes moved past Evelyn and landed directly on Clara. Did she walk too much today? Did she take the afternoon pills? Did she eat enough protein? Did you check her blood pressure? His tone carried a managerial exactness, each question more like a line item than an expression of care. He would adjust Evelyn's pill organizer, set reminders on Clara's phone, and monitor meal portions with clinical precision. It wasn't unkind, but it was controlling in a way that made Evelyn's stomach clench. Clara's reactions were subtle but unmistakable. Her hands trembled slightly when she handed Eric a report of the day. Her gaze dropped to the floor whenever he entered a room, as though anticipating correction. When Eric touched her shoulder, she flinched, not visibly enough for someone unobservant to notice, but Evelyn noticed. She noticed everything. Still, she tried to explain it away. City life was demanding. Eric worked long hours. Maybe Clara was naturally anxious, or simply trying to please her husband. Evelyn told herself she was being overly sensitive, projecting old fears onto new situations. After all, no marriage was perfect. But then, the first strange event disrupted the fragile balance. At exactly 3 a.m. one night, Evelyn woke to a sudden roar of water rushing through the pipes. It was as if someone had turned the shower on full blast, no gradual build-up, just an immediate, pounding surge echoing behind the walls. The sound filled the apartment with an unnatural intensity, drowning out even the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Evelyn sat up in bed, heart racing. She listened for footsteps, for voices, for any movement that might explain it. There was nothing. No light under the door. No shadows passing through the hallway. Just the relentless torrent of water, indifferent and loud. After about 15 minutes, just as abruptly as it had begun, the noise stopped. Silence fell again. Thick, heavy, absolute. Evelyn lay awake long after the pipes quieted, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what she'd heard. Maybe the building's plumbing was old. Maybe someone upstairs had insomnia or late-night shifts. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. But when the same thing happened the next night, again at precisely 3 a.m., the rational explanations began to feel thin. And when it continued night after night, unwavering in its timing, Evelyn could no longer ignore the uneasy rhythm settling over the home. It was the first sign that something in this beautiful apartment was deeply, quietly wrong. As the days folded into one another, Evelyn found herself watching more closely than she intended to. It wasn't deliberate at first, just small observations, passing impressions, a wince from Clara when she reached too high for a plate, a quick intake of breath when Eric brushed past her, a stiffness in her posture whenever she heard his key in the door. Then she noticed the bruises. The first one was a faint yellow-green shadow on Clara's wrist as she poured tea one afternoon. It looked like the kind of mark that comes days after impact, faded but undeniable. Evelyn's gaze lingered longer than she meant to, her breath catching the way it used to when she instinctively scanned her own arms decades earlier. Clara noticed and tucked her hand behind the kettle with an embarrassed little laugh. "Oh, this? I bumped the cabinet door. I'm so clumsy sometimes." The explanation arrived too quickly, too neatly, but Evelyn didn't press. Years of surviving had taught her that victims often defended the ones who hurt them before they ever defended themselves. A few days later, While helping Clara chop vegetables for dinner, Evelyn saw another mark. This one was a small, purplish bruise near Clara's temple, partly concealed by her hair. When Evelyn gently asked, "Does it hurt?" Clara brushed her fingers through her hair with a forced smile. "Just a mosquito bite. They love me for some reason." In late autumn Seattle, mosquitoes were long gone. Evelyn felt a slow, cold heaviness settle in her chest. Eric's demeanor shifted too. He grew more irritable, often snapping about small things, the salt not being where he left it, Clara forgetting to record an appointment, Evelyn microwaving her tea too long. He dismissed Clara's attempts to explain herself, cutting her off with the sharpness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Each clipped word, each tightening jawline, each impatient sigh chipped away at Evelyn's hopes that she had imagined the tension. And beneath his rising irritability, she saw a shadow she knew too well, a reflection of her late husband's temper. The same controlled tone, the same simmering impatience, the same way a room seemed to shrink when he walked in. At night, Evelyn lay awake long after the apartment went dark. The roar of water at 3 a.m. had become a grim, nightly ritual, but now the silence afterward frightened her more. Her mind replayed the bruises, Clara's trembling hands, the brittle laughter that never reached her eyes. Old memories crept back, memories Evelyn had spent years trying to bury. She remembered standing in her own bathroom years ago, staring into a mirror with a split lip, telling herself she must have walked into the doorframe. She remembered the way fear wrapped itself around her ribs each night as she waited to hear whether her husband came home in a good mood or a dangerous one. She remembered the excuses she crafted with professional ease. "It's nothing, just a fall. I'm fine." Clara was giving those same answers now. Confusion gave way to a familiar, unwelcome recognition. The patterns were too precise, the bruises too strategically explained, the tension too constant, and with recognition came dread. It pressed against her chest, quiet, persistent, suffocating. The kind of dread that seeped into her bones, whispering truths she didn't want to see. It was the dread of knowing that something was wrong in this home, something dark, something she had once lived through and barely survived. She told herself she might be overreacting, projecting her past onto Clara's present. But each new day made that lie harder to hold on to. Evelyn had hoped those memories would stay buried. Instead, they were rising like ghosts, insisting she look directly at the truth she had spent a lifetime avoiding. The water began exactly at 3 a.m., just as it always did. An abrupt rush through the walls that yanked Evelyn out of sleep as though someone had shaken her awake. But on this night, something felt different. The sound was louder, closer, almost violent. It wasn't the dull, distant rumble she had grown accustomed to. It was forceful, pounding, unrestrained. Evelyn sat up, heart thudding in her chest. For several long seconds, she stayed perfectly still, listening. The pipes roared on, relentless, a torrent hammering behind the bathroom wall. She stared at the faint sliver of hallway light beneath her door and felt cold. Instinctive dread spread through her body. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, the floor cool beneath her feet. For nights, she had done nothing. For nights, she had pretended it was normal. But something deep inside her, some careful, cautious instinct sharpened by decades of surviving a man like Matthew, told her not to ignore this one. She opened her bedroom door, just enough to slip through. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen nightlight. The air felt strangely heavy, thick with moisture. As she stepped into the hallway, a drop of water hit her forearm, then another. The ceiling above her glistened with condensation. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, a narrow slice of bright, cold light cutting across the floor. Water trickled out from beneath it in thin streams, spreading across the hardwood in shallow, shimmering pools. Evelyn's breath caught. She crept forward, each step careful, silent. As she reached the doorway, she hesitated, but only for a moment. Then she leaned in just enough to see. Through the narrow opening, the scene hit her like a physical blow. Eric stood fully clothed under the freezing shower, his shirt plastered to his skin, his hair dripping into his eyes. His hand was clamped around Clara's hair, forcing her head back under the water. Clara was shaking violently, her arms held protectively over her chest, her body curled in on itself as if trying to disappear. Her lips were blue, her eyes were wide with terror. Eric's grip tightened. "Do you understand?" he said, his voice low, controlled. The voice of a man who wanted power more than he wanted breath. "Do you understand what happens when you disobey?" He said it almost softly, softly enough that the softness became more frightening than a scream. Then came the slap. Sharp, precise, a single, vicious crack that echoed off the tiles and sliced through the pounding water. Evelyn's whole body flinched, and in an instant, she wasn't in Seattle anymore. She wasn't standing in a hallway watching her son. She was 28 again, barefoot on her own bathroom floor, back pressed against cold tile, watching Matthew's hand swing toward her. She felt the sting before it landed, felt the shame blooming across her cheek, felt her own helplessness, thick and choking, rise up inside her. Two scenes overlapped, 2 decades apart, identical in their cruelty. Her vision blurred, her heartbeat hammered in her ears. She pressed a trembling hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound, because she knew that if Eric noticed her standing there, his rage would find a new target. Very slowly, she backed away from the light, from the water, from the truth she had never wanted to see. She stepped around the puddles, retreating down the hallway as silently as a shadow. Once inside her room, she closed the door without letting it click. Her fingers shook so violently that she fumbled with the lock twice before it finally turned. Then she stumbled to her bed. She crawled beneath the blanket, pulling it over her head like a child hiding from a nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't imaginary. It was real, just beyond her door. Unfolding beneath the icy spray of a shower, she could still hear pounding behind the walls. She lay there trembling until the water finally stopped. Long after the apartment went silent, long after Eric's footsteps faded, long after Clara's fragile sobbing ceased, Evelyn stayed awake, eyes wide open in the darkness. She did not need time to process what she had seen. She knew immediately. Her son, the boy she had raised, the boy she had sacrificed for, the boy she had once believed she could protect from the shadows of his father, had become the very man she once escaped. And nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came with an unsettling stillness. The apartment was unusually quiet, as if even the walls were exhausted from the night before. Evelyn moved through the kitchen on autopilot, her hand steady despite the tightness in her chest. She cracked eggs into a pan, sliced fruit, set the table with mechanical precision. The familiarity of the motions kept her anchored, even as her mind replayed the images from the bathroom. Clara's blue lips, Eric's grip, the slap echoing through the steam. She didn't allow herself to linger on it. Not now. Not with both of them about to wake. When Clara entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from an early shower, she offered a timid good morning. Her eyes carried the swollen heaviness of someone who had cried in silence. Eric followed a few minutes later, his expression cool, composed, as if the night's violence had been nothing more than an unpleasant chore. Evelyn poured tea into 3 mugs and cleared her throat. "I need to tell you both something," she said, her voice calm, each word placed with deliberate care. "I've decided to move into an assisted living facility in Bellevue." Clara froze, the mug halfway to her lips. Eric's fork clattered against the plate. "What?" Eric's voice sliced through the air, sharp, immediate, incredulous. "Mom, that makes no sense. Why would you do that? People will think I can't take care of my own mother." "It's my decision," Evelyn replied evenly. I want a quieter place, a consistent routine, professional support. It will be better for me. For you." Eric leaned forward, jaw tightening. "Do you have any idea how it looks when a parent chooses to move out of her son's home? People will talk. My colleagues. Our friends. This isn't what families do." Evelyn held his gaze, unflinching. "It's what I'm doing." The firmness in her tone unsettled him. He wasn't used to her drawing boundaries. Not her. Not the mother who had bent, folded, and rearranged herself around every demand. Clara set her mug down with trembling hands. "Evelyn, please don't go because of me. I don't want you to think this is not your fault," Evelyn said gently, turning toward her. "None of this is because of you. You've been nothing but kind to me." Clara's eyes glistened, but she nodded, swallowing her panic. Eric paced behind the table, running a hand through his hair. "Fine," he said finally, the word stung with resentment rather than acceptance. "If that's what you want, I'll arrange it. But don't expect me to explain this to everyone." Evelyn nodded. It didn't matter what he told anyone. True to his word and his temperament, Eric handled everything with cold, professional efficiency. Within hours, he had emailed 2 facilities, scheduled a tour, completed paperwork, and arranged a move-in date. His tone never softened, not once. And so, 2 days later, Evelyn stepped into her new living space at a quiet assisted living facility in Bellevue. The hallways were softly lit, warm rather than sterile. Residents greeted her with polite smiles. A nurse showed her the dining room, the reading lounge, the garden terrace. No tension, no shouting, no trembling hands, no 3 a.m. water hammering through the pipes. For the first time since arriving in Seattle, Evelyn exhaled fully, her breath coming out steady, anchored, her chest finally loosening under the weight she hadn't even realized she carried. Evelyn settled slowly into the rhythms of the assisted living facility. The days unfolded with a gentle predictability she had forgotten could exist. Mornings were spent in the dining room, where residents gathered around sunlit tables with oatmeal, scrambled eggs, and the soft murmur of friendly conversation. At first, she kept mostly to herself, offering polite smiles and quiet nods. But gradually, the faces around her became more familiar. Mrs. Watkins, who always asked about the weather. George, who collected crossword puzzles. The nursing aide who hummed old jazz songs while refilling water pitchers. In the afternoons, Evelyn took slow walks through the garden terrace. Hydrangeas lined the pathway, their pale blue blossoms trembling in the breeze. She found herself pausing often, listening to the rustle of leaves, watching the sunlight shift through the branches, letting the calm untangle the knots in her chest. Yet, even in this peaceful setting, the memories clung to her like shadows. Sometimes the crunch of gravel under her shoes brought back the slap she had witnessed. Sometimes the softness of the sprinklers reminded her of the roaring water at 3 a.m. The trauma lived close to the surface, ready to rise at the slightest sound. On her 3rd week there, while walking toward the library nook, she heard a familiar voice call her name. "Evelyn Porter? I can't believe it's you." She turned, confused for a moment, before recognition dawned. Margaret Nolan, the former colleague she hadn't seen in years, stood by the window, her eyes warm with surprise. Margaret looked older, her hair silvered, but the kindness in her expression was unchanged. "I never thought I'd run into you here," Margaret said, stepping forward to embrace her. What a small world. They sat together in the lounge, catching up in the way people do when time has passed but familiarity hasn't faded. Margaret had retired before Evelyn, spent years caring for her daughter, and eventually decided to move into the facility for the community and structure. Her voice carried a steady gentleness, the kind Evelyn remembered from staff meetings and lunch breaks long ago. As they talked, Margaret's expression shifted subtly, compassion softening her features. "You look tired," she said quietly. Not physically. Here. She gestured to her chest. Something's weighing on you. Evelyn opened her mouth to dismiss it, to offer some polite reassurance, but the words stuck in her throat. Margaret watched her with patient eyes, the kind that waited without pressure. They moved outside to a secluded bench near the garden's edge. There, surrounded by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic, Evelyn felt her guard loosen. She stared at her hands for a long moment, then began to speak. At first, her voice trembled. She described the tension in the apartment, the bruises she'd seen on Clara, the way Clara shrank when Eric entered a room. She told Margaret about the nightly 3 a.m. water, the fear that had begun to seep back into her bones. And finally, she described the bathroom, the freezing shower, Eric's hand tangled in Clara's hair, the slap, the controlled threat in his voice. As she spoke, the memories poured out with a raw honesty she hadn't allowed herself in decades. She told Margaret about her late husband's rage, the familiar look in Eric's eyes, the terrifying realization that her son had become a mirror of the man she once escaped. When she finished, she felt drained, hollow, and strangely relieved, like someone who had been holding her breath for years and finally exhaled. Margaret took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry you went through all of that," she said. "And I'm sorry Clara is going through it now." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind move through the hydrangeas. Then Margaret spoke again, quiet but firm. "You can't change Eric. Men like him don't transform because someone asks them to. But you can stand beside Clara. She needs someone who sees the truth." Evelyn felt the words settle inside her, heavy and steady. For the first time since she left the apartment, she realized she wasn't powerless. Evelyn sat in the waiting area of a sleek downtown building, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the morning traffic inching along the streets of Seattle, buses groaning, horns blaring, pedestrians rushing with coffee cups in hand. The city felt overwhelming, loud, and different. Yet she was here for a purpose she could no longer ignore. A door opened, and a man in a navy suit stepped out. "Mrs. Porter? I'm Michael Lane. Please come in." His voice was steady, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who dealt with crises daily and learned how to stay anchored in the middle of them. Evelyn followed him into a modest office overlooking Elliott Bay. Bookshelves lined the walls, binders labeled with case numbers, volumes on state law, folders stacked neatly beside a small bowl of mints. Everything was orderly, controlled. "Margaret told me some of what you shared," Michael began once they were seated. "But I need you to tell me everything directly." So Evelyn did. She recounted the bruises, the trembling hands, the flooded pipes at 3 a.m., and the night in the bathroom, Eric's grip, the slap, Clara's blue lips under the pouring water. Michael listened without interrupting, taking concise notes, his expression a mix of professionalism and concern. When she finished, the silence lingered for a moment. Then Michael leaned forward. "Under Washington state law, Clara will need strong, documented evidence before filing anything. Domestic violence cases rely heavily on proof, not suspicion, even when the pattern is obvious." "What kind of proof?" Evelyn asked. He listed them calmly one by one. Photographs of injuries, taken with timestamps. The newer phones will automatically record that. Audio recordings of threats or verbal abuse, even partial ones. A written log of each incident. Dates, times, what was said, what happened. Emails or text messages if he sends anything hostile or controlling. If you ever see financial records, credit card statements, bank withdrawals, those should be copied or photographed as well. And if Clara ever seeks medical treatment, she must request her chart and discharge papers. Each item landed like a weight. Heavy. Necessary. Evelyn nodded slowly. I can help her, but we'll have to be careful. Very, he agreed. If Eric discovers she's documenting him, things could escalate. She needs someone she can trust. That's you. Later that afternoon, Evelyn waited in the garden at the assisted living facility, seated on the secluded bench where she and Margaret often talked. Clara slipped through the gate a few minutes after visiting hours began, a hood pulled over her head despite the mild weather. When she reached Evelyn, her composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she sank onto the bench. I can't keep doing this, Clara whispered, choking on the words. Every day feels worse. I never know what mood he'll be in. I don't know how to leave. Evelyn took her trembling hands in her own. You won't do it alone. She explained everything Michael had told her, carefully, step by step, mirroring the original plan with quiet precision. She spoke about logs, recordings, photos taken discreetly in the mirror, bruises captured from multiple angles, small digital folders hidden behind passwords. She instructed Clara on how to save emails without sending alerts, how to forward voicemail threats to a secure account, how to write nightly entries describing each incident while they were still fresh. Clara listened with wide, frightened eyes, but she didn't pull away. You have to be patient, Evelyn told her gently. It may take weeks, but every small piece matters. I can try, Clara whispered. I'm scared. I know, Evelyn replied softly, but this is how we build your way out. And so the evidence began to accumulate, quietly, steadily, painfully. Clara photographed fresh bruises in the bathroom mirror, angling the light so the marks showed clearly. She recorded snippets of Eric's cutting remarks when he forgot to lower his voice. She saved emails where he criticized her spending, her choices, her worth. She wrote diary entries late at night, hiding the notebook beneath folded sweaters. Each piece was a small step forward. Each piece was a risk. Tension settled over their lives like a storm cloud building on the horizon. Heavy, waiting, inevitable. But now, for the first time, Clara was no longer drowning alone. Clara arrived at the assisted living garden just after dusk, her breath unsteady, her eyes swollen from crying. Evelyn saw the fear in her even before she spoke. She sat beside her on the bench, the same secluded spot where truth had first been spoken between them. I'm going to say it tonight, Clara whispered. The word. Divorce. Her voice trembled so violently that the word felt fragile, as if it might shatter between them. Evelyn's heart clenched. Are you sure? Once you say it, things may escalate quickly. I can't wait any more, Clara said. If I don't say it now, I never will. Her hands tightened around her phone. He'll come home in 2 hours. I'll tell him then. Evelyn walked her to the gate, hugged her tightly, and watched her disappear into the evening light. Small, determined, and terrified. 2 hours later, chaos erupted. It began with a sound on Evelyn's phone, a voicemail notification. When she pressed play, the noise burst through the speaker. Shouting, something crashing, a sharp cry, footsteps, and then a muffled scream. The recording cut abruptly, replaced by silence. Her phone rang before she could process the noise. Eric's name flashed on the screen. She answered with shaking hands. His voice exploded through the line, dripping with rage. You will never see her again. Do you hear me? Never. And then he hung up. Evelyn stood frozen for a breath, the terror settling into her bones. Then instinct took over. She dialed attorney Michael Lane, explaining everything in a voice that barely held together. He didn't hesitate. Call 911. Now. I'll meet you there. Evelyn made the call. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers and an unmarked detective car were racing toward the South Lake Union high-rise. Evelyn arrived seconds behind them, escorted by Michael. Inside the building, the elevator doors opened to a scene of tension. Officers battering the apartment door after Eric refused to let them in. The crash of wood breaking filled the hallway. When the officers burst inside, the first thing they saw was Clara, crumpled near the kitchen island, clutching her arm, her face streaked with tears and water. A shattered glass lay beside her. She was shaking uncontrollably. Eric stood several feet away, chest heaving, fists clenched. "She's unstable," he insisted. "She threw a glass. She attacked me." But the officers ignored him, focusing on Clara. Within moments, they helped her to her feet, wrapped her in a blanket, and guided her outside. An ambulance waited at the curb. As Clara was taken away, Eric tried to follow, but two officers blocked him. "Sir, step back." He hired attorneys within 24 hours, aggressive, polished, expensive. They filed motions, questioned the validity of every piece of evidence, and attempted to dismantle the case from the inside out. The courtroom battles began soon after. Eric's defense painted Clara as emotionally unstable, claiming she cried to manipulate sympathy. They argued the bruises were self-inflicted, the audio recordings incomplete or taken out of context. One attorney even suggested Clara may have staged incidents after misunderstanding normal marital disagreements. Emails, diary entries, and recordings were scrutinized. The defense insisted that timestamps were unreliable, that the logs were dramatic exaggerations, and that nothing proved deliberate harm. For a while, too long, it seemed to work. Evelyn felt the strength of their case slipping, the truth being drowned in polished legal arguments and strategic doubt. Clara, still fragile and recovering, sat through hearings with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then everything changed. Midway through a hearing, the judge paused as the courtroom doors opened. A couple stepped inside, neighbors from across the hall in the apartment complex. They approached the judge's bench with a USB drive and a sworn statement. They had camera footage from the building hallway. Their new security system captured movement directly facing the Porter's apartment door. When the video was played, the entire room fell silent. The footage showed Eric yanking Clara out of the apartment by her hair, dragging her across the hallway. He shoved her against the wall, leaning close in a threatening posture as she tried to shield herself. His face was twisted in fury. Her fear was unmistakable. No sound was needed for the truth to be deafening. Even Eric's attorneys went still. The judge watched the footage twice, expression unreadable, then turned to Eric. "This," she said, "is clear evidence of physical abuse and coercive control. The court accepts this without reservation." The shift was immediate and irreversible. Clara was granted a full divorce. Assets were divided equitably, with restrictions placed on Eric's access to their accounts. A financial compensation order was issued for Clara's medical bills, therapy, and emotional damage documented in her logs. A protective order was placed on Eric, prohibiting him from contact. And for the first time in months, Clara felt a breath of air that didn't hurt going in. Clara moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city, modest, tucked between a row of maple trees, with sunlight that spilled generously across the living room floor each morning. The first time Evelyn visited, the place was almost empty. White walls, bare windows, a single folding chair near the kitchen counter. But Clara smiled shyly as she held open the door, her eyes brighter than they'd been in months. "It's not much yet," she said, "but it's mine." That was enough. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn visited often, taking the bus from Bellevue to Clara's neighborhood. Together, they picked out curtains, soft lilac ones for the bedroom, sheer ivory ones for the living room. They bought a second-hand dining table from a young couple moving to Portland. They stocked the kitchen with simple basics: rice, pasta, tea, and fresh herbs Clara grew in tiny pots along the windowsill. Their routines became gentle and grounding. On Sundays, they cooked together, roasted vegetables, chicken soup, blueberry muffins when Clara was in the mood for sweetness. Evelyn found herself humming while chopping onions, something she hadn't done in years. Clara set the table with quiet care, occasionally glancing at Evelyn as though still trying to understand how she had gained a mother in the middle of so much loss. One afternoon, as they arranged new throw pillows on the couch, Clara paused. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." Evelyn set the pillow down. "What is it, dear?" Clara took a breath, her eyes filling with a tenderness Evelyn hadn't seen before. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air for a moment, fragile and miraculous. Evelyn felt something warm bloom inside her, a quiet joy, tinged with disbelief. "Oh, Clara!" she whispered, stepping forward to embrace her. "A baby!" Clara nodded against her shoulder. "I didn't think I ever could, not after everything. But the doctor said I'm healthy. The baby's healthy. A new life. After so much fear, after so many nights shaking in silence, this small promise felt profound. Evelyn stayed with her that entire afternoon, talking about prenatal vitamins, soft blankets, tiny socks, an impossibly hopeful future that was slowly taking shape. Clara's smile grew steadier, her hands resting protectively over her stomach as if guarding a secret worth more than anything she had lost. Meanwhile, Eric attempted to reconnect. It began with a text, "We need to talk." Then a voicemail, "I deserve to explain myself." Then a call that lasted 3 seconds before Evelyn pressed block, her hand steady. She owed him nothing. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what he'd done. Love did not require blindness. Parenthood did not require silence. Evelyn remained in the assisted living facility, not because she had to, but because she wanted the gentle structure it offered. Her days had shape now. Breakfasts with Mrs. Watkins, crossword puzzles with George, quiet afternoons in the garden with Margaret. Sometimes she'd sit by the hydrangeas and listen to the wind, grateful for the simple sound of peace. Clara visited often, her belly gradually rounding, her steps slower as the months passed. The residents adored her, offering knitted hats, baby name suggestions, and stories from their own years of parenthood. Evelyn watched Clara blossom into someone softer, braver, whole, and she reflected, often quietly, on what she had learned. Violence does not end on its own. Silence is not neutrality, and family is not defined by blood, but by the people who choose to protect you when danger arrives. On a late spring evening, Evelyn sat beneath the garden arbor, watching the sun dip below the trees. She inhaled deeply, letting the cool air wash over her. Her life had not been easy, but she was still here, alive, steady, reclaiming the peace she once believed was impossible. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was survival, and for the first time in decades, that was enough.